She is in her second year of the Creative Nonfiction MFA program at SF State. The majority of her writing focuses on travel and her frustrations with public education in this country. She's also recently begun writing fantasy and sci-fi, which was probably inevitable. There's a good chance she's wearing Harry Potter socks right now.
They're actually Christmas socks.
That's pretty close. It's the same movie.
I mean...
Speaking of Harry Potter, she has the best Professor Trelawney costume you have ever seen. She's currently in the process of becoming a bona fide fortune teller and is considering wearing the costume at least once during a reading to see if a client notices. She's not published anywhere yet, but she's working on it, I swear. So keep an eye out. Her future plans include getting a pet iguana and naming it Donna.
Aww.
Please welcome Ellen Azevedo.
That iguana thing is really true, and
Donna
my boyfriend's
iguana.
really against it. He doesn't think we need a large reptile. And I disagree.
He's wrong.
Obviously. Okay. Oh, this is out of order. That's unfortunate. Okay. Well, no, that's fine. We'll just read this in whatever order it's in. That could be interesting. Okay. Good. No, it's fine. All right. This is a thing that might be part of my thesis. Maybe. So we'll see. I don't know. I hope you like it. It's called Portrait of the Survivor. I was 19 when I went to Phnom Penh, Cambodia. As I bounced through the city's impoverished streets on the large air-conditioned tour bus, the guide spoke gently in his sing-song voice about the murder of his family. When he was a child, his mother was a teacher. Then political turmoil erupted and the educated were targeted. His family was forced to flee to the countryside, but a friend gave away his mother's identity, they were found, and she was taken. In all likelihood, she was tortured and slaughtered. He would never know for sure. I was surprised by the lack of anger in his voice as he recounted his tale. Before me, small and slender, struggling to stay on his feet as he spoke into the bus microphone, stood a person without hatred. I thought of my own mother, also a teacher. I wept before leaving her for a mere semester when I embarked on the floating college campus that carried me to Southeast Asia. I thought of how she supported my decision, both emotionally and financially, to attend semester at sea. I thought of every trip she had taken me on since childhood. I thought of the countless hours I spent in her classroom staring at a map of the world, dreaming of the places I would go, of the places she and I would go together. This man couldn't even lay his mother's bones to rest. I wondered if he searched the museum when it opened for his mother's photo. I wondered if he found it. My group was warned before the bus rumbled to a stop alongside the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum that we should not give money to begging children. It would only encourage them to stop going to school, our guide sang. I understood the logic in this and had turned down beggars before, so I filed the advice in my mind without further thought. I descended from the luxurious breeze of the bus's interior into the sticky cloud that is the Southeast Asian climate. The sound of horns and humans bounced across the uneven sidewalk toward me. I shuffled toward the museum's interest and, as if in slow motion, passed a small child. He, or she, had collected no more than 6 birthdays. He was dirty and begging for food, struggling to balance a baby with a distended belly on his skinny hip. My eyes lingered on the tiny fingers grazing the tiny lips in a gesture of hunger, even as my feet carried me through the turnstile and inside the walls. A museum guide informed my group that Tuol Sleng started out as a high school, and I could see those origins reflected in the architecture. 3-story, once white concrete buildings surrounded a courtyard with rooms all facing outward, connected by balcony corridors. It would have been unremarkable, a run-down school I passed 1,000 times and never noticed, if it hadn't been for all the barbed wire and the bars on the windows. The school became a prison, the guide announced, during the reign of the Khmer Rouge, an extreme Maoist group that took control of Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. We listened solemnly. During that time, the Cambodian people were forced to evacuate the cities and march to the countryside, where they were literally worked to death. He continued speaking as he led us through the courtyard into the dingy, tile-floored rooms. Those whom were viewed as intellectuals, such as our guide's mother, or threats to communism were taken to secret prisons like Tuol Sleng, then known as S-21, where they were interrogated, tortured, and killed. Tuol Sleng became the most infamous of these prisons because of the 14,000 to 17,000 people that were brought there. Only 7 are known to have survived. Tuol Sleng also earned infamy because those in charge believed deeply in documenting everything that took place at the prison. Not only were meticulous notes taken on the horrors that occurred, but photographs as well. Our guide directed us through rooms where mugshots of the prisoners covered displays that reminded me of portable whiteboards. The imagery paid strange homage to the classrooms that had once been. I moved silently past the eyes of the dead, trying to be respectful, but also trying to remember everything I was seeing. My mother was always telling me in museums, remember this, this is important. I took my time looking at the faces of all the victims. I wanted to absorb them in the tragedy they had experienced. The portraits were black and white and were all similar in a way. Faces registered looks of sorrow, horror, disbelief, and emptiness. They all looked tortured and defeated because they were. They all looked dead. But as I moved through, one face leapt out from the others. A young man glared at me. Or was he a boy? It was impossible to know his age. That information was not provided and difficult to guess. His brows were knit firmly together, yet no lines formed between them. The peach fuzz of a mustache looked like it could be making a debut, but the quality of the photo made it hard to be certain. Perhaps the dark color of his hair made the shadow of a mustache an ever-present quality in his appearance. The shape of his face and his features were round and slightly oversized, as though he was still growing into them. If I had to guess, I wouldn't have placed him past his mid-teens. Then again, I was often accused of looking years younger than my actual age. He had probably been a boy before the photo was taken, before he arrived at Tuol Sleng. Maybe he had just made it over the hurdle of puberty, rejoicing that he'd conquered that portion of life. Perhaps he attended Tuol Sleng when it was a school. I wondered if he'd had his first kiss yet, if he'd ever had the chance to fall in love, if he'd ever read a book that had seized his enthusiasm, if he'd ever tasted chocolate peanut butter ice cream, if he'd ever felt truly liberated, like he was in control of his own happiness, the way you feel when you hang out of the sunroof of a speeding car or fly down a hill on a bike. By the time the photo was taken, he was no longer a boy. I stared into the face of the man for a long time. Eventually, I recaptured the image on my camera and continued on. After Tuol Sleng, we visited the killing fields. This was the site of the mass graves the Khmer Rouge used to dispose of their victims. The bones of the man in my photo had no doubt rested in the killing fields at some point. Perhaps they still do. I had seen photos of execution sites. I was familiar with muddy trenches filled with skeletal corpses piled high. How many Holocaust photos had I gazed upon in my education and life? The Holocaust, in my mind, was the standard for genocide, and the killing fields did not live up to that standard. Lying just outside of Phnom Penh, the site was once a village called Cheung Ek. Just as one could still see the school behind what Tuol Sleng came, one could still see the peaceful village behind the killing fields. It was quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The sound of wind chimes drifted around me. Or perhaps it only seemed as though there should be wind chimes. It was green and lush and overgrown. Park benches could be spotted here and there. Large trees offered shade that provided little reprieve from the humidity. Despite the horrible history of the place, it was serene, the sort of spot one might seek out for a picnic. I felt guilty for wishing I had a book to read quietly under one of the trees. Was it wrong to find a place with such a gruesome past pleasant? I moved through in reverie. As I passed under a large tree, I nearly lost my balance. Pausing, one foot in the air, I read a neat little wooden sign that asked politely that I not step in the mass grave. Had I not caught sight of it, I would have trudged right through. The grave was filled in and differed little from the surrounding area. The Holocaust photos had not prepared me for this. Something about the pleasant demeanor of the sign, in contrast to the horrors it marked, provoked me to laugh aloud. I laughed at a mass grave. What kind of person laughs at a mass grave? A friend standing nearby offered sympathetically that it was a weird sign. I could tell that she, too, was unsure of how to navigate the unexpected quiescence of the site. I continued along the path until I came upon a glass case filled with skulls, as if it were in one of the Grimm's fairy tales. I couldn't say how tall it stood, too tall, much taller than me, more than 3 times taller than me. In my mind, it extended endlessly into the trees, a 3-dimensional rectangle with an infinite length and a width somewhere near my wingspan. Inside was a full house of browned, fibrous bone. The smooth, once white surfaces had been roughened and stained by time spent in the earth. The case had no vacancies. I circled the monument, staring into the empty orbits of thousands of skulls, maxillas and mandibles with chipped and missing teeth grimaced out at me. Had one of these skulls belonged to the man from my photo? No. These were anonymous faces of the dead, lost to the tragedy. The man from my photo was anonymous, but not lost, and not dead. Occasionally over the years, I have pulled up the man's photo on my computer to stare at it. I hate looking at it, but I can't stop. Of all the horrible things I saw in that museum, this photo continues to haunt me. I think about it, tell friends about it, bring it up again to stare at it more. He's looking at me now from behind this Word document. I can see him, feel him, his eyes burning holes through these words as if he knows I'm writing about him. He is enduring, unforgettable, and demanding. He wants my attention. I position documents carefully to hide him, but he's scorched into my screen, embedded into my eyes. My boyfriend once asked me what it is about the photo that grips me. I can see the ghost of my 19-year-old self in the reflection from the glass. It's hard to make out, but in the black of the man's shirt, I can see the tie-dye pajama tee that I had, for some reason, thought appropriate to wear out in public that day. The hot pink corner of the camera I'd bought for the trip, long since made obsolete by cell phone cameras, grazes the man's cheek faintly. I had never heard of the Khmer Rouge before I went to Cambodia. I knew virtually nothing about the country at that point. Had only gone in an attempt to travel to as many countries as possible. In high school, I always joked that the world history classes I took should have just been called American and European History with a cameo by Japan for World War II. Twelve slang made me realize how truthful my joke had been. Just a decade before I was born, as Apple and Microsoft burst onto the scene, Star Wars: A New Hope was released and the people of Jonestown drank the Kool-Aid, more than 1.5 million people were being slaughtered at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. The Cambodian people were stripped of all rights. The educated were tortured and murdered. Never once had any course in all 12 years of my public education even mentioned that this had occurred. Or if it had been mentioned, it had not made its way into my long-term memory. There was not even a whisper of recognition. Not trusting my own recollection, I messaged friends to see if they'd learned about the Khmer Rouge. Texts went out to people who'd gone to my high school, people who'd gone to school in different cities, different countries, different counties, different states. I asked friends with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees from top universities. I asked people at parties. I asked people who serve in our military. Most had never heard of the Khmer Rouge. One unwitting friend responded cheerfully to my text asking what she knew of the Khmer Rouge with, "Nothing at all, smiley face." A few minutes later, I received another text exclaiming, "But now that I've looked it up, Jesus!" One had learned about it from a crossword puzzle. One from a parent. Of all the people I asked, only one person learned about it in high school, and one other person had learned about it briefly in college. Over sushi, I probed my father for information about the Vietnam War. He was never drafted, but knows some who were. He gives his usual response as he drops spicy cucumber salad into his lap. It was crazy. He picks up and eats the stray cucumber, then adds, "Nobody knew what they were fighting for." I tell him about my research. I tell him our country dropped more... Wait a minute. Did I miss a page here? No. Alright, sorry. I tell him about my research. I tell him our country dropped more bombs on Cambodia, a country we were not at war with, than the Allies dropped during the entire course of World War II, including Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Doesn't that just make you go, ooh? I ask, quoting Buffy the Vampire Slayer for no discernible reason. He shrugs. No, it was crazy over there. 150,000 civilians were killed. A fact that drops my jaw, but fails to interrupt the flow of my father's chopsticks. Clearly he understands something about that time that I do not. We were, of course, trying to take out the Viet Cong, who had moved across Cambodia's borders. We were also trying to take out the Khmer Rouge to prevent them from rising to power. How many times had I learned in school that communism was bad and must be fought? And yet I had never learned the consequences of such a fight. In further attempts to protect Cambodia from the spread of communism, We set up a puppet government and overthrew their king. This effectively drove the king into the arms of the Khmer Rouge. Somehow, this was not an anticipated outcome. With the US bombs creating an atmosphere of terror and the king on their side, the Khmer Rouge quickly rose to power. Articles I've read cite the US's actions as providing propaganda for the Khmer Rouge, but was it really propaganda if it was true? At the time I took that photo, the first of the Khmer Rouge leaders was about to be brought to trial. 2 years later, in 2010, the man who ran Tuol Sleng would become the first to be found guilty. I discovered this for the first time this year in 2015. Why aren't we talking about this? It is the look on the man's face that catches and keeps my attention. When prisoners were brought to Tuol Sleng, there was no innocent until proven guilty. Everyone who entered Tuol Sleng was deemed guilty. Prisoners were forced to confess their crimes and were killed, all but 7. The man in my photo was not one of those 7. He was killed. That may have been the last photo taken of him while he was alive, but alive he was. In a place where there was no resistance, no chance to defend oneself, the man fought back in the only way he could. His expression was a final act of defiance, a resounding fuck you that has reverberated across more than 3 decades to catch my gaze. Of all the deadened eyes in the portraits surrounding him, his are violently alive. They are wide and piercing, punctuated by brows that are digging fiercely into the nasal bridge. His jaw is set, bottom lip thrust forward, nostrils flaring. They did not defeat him. His eyes are alive.